lost a lot because of the men that interrupted and abused me and that didn't care about what would happen to me as a result of their actions. But I have regained some of it, and what's missing is still missing, but that's fine because I'm not missing, I'm still here and I'm doing very well, I'm very happy. But I understand that lots of other people are not.
O projeto Leeds tem o prazer de entrevistar a Una, nossa convidada especial, quebrou barreiras de nacionalidade, chegou na Inglaterra e hoje a gente vai conversar um pouco com essa quadrinista tão importante, que fez um quadrinho tão importante sobre violência contra a mulher, abuso sexual, e eu não tenho muito o que falar porque a palavra é toda dela. Como que você começou na sua carreira de quadrinista?
A career, I still feel like a beginner, that's one thing. I started by reading comics a lot in my lunch break at work. I used to work in an art school in England and I was very happy there, but I wasn't very happy with the art scene, the fine art scene, the contemporary fine art scene, because I felt a lot of the time like I was talking to a very small group of people. And I wanted to talk to more people. I've always been interested in popular culture, and I suppose I was thinking, this is what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it, and I don't know what I want to say, and the things that I want to say are maybe not very funny, maybe they're very serious. I was studying at the time to do a master's degree at the University of Leeds, an MFA, a Master of Fine Art, and I'd elected a module in feminism with a very, very famous, art historian, feminist art historian. So I was also kind of a bit of a fangirl, I suppose, with this woman, and I was kind of following her around doing all the different classes. So as well as feminism, she taught about the Holocaust, and she talked about post-traumatic representation, and she talked about how the representational world has changed because of knowledge of the Holocaust. I found it really fascinating, and I thought, okay, for me this is really significant because I'm really interested in trying to describe my own trauma and also the trauma that I know I share with so many millions of women and girls around the world. And then the same teacher, the same feminist teacher, she gave me Mouse. She said, you like comics? She says, yeah, you should read this. And I was like, okay. So it is possible to write about really big stories and really very serious issues using the comics medium. But what I didn't know at the time, because I had the idea in my head, I thought, okay, so if you can write a book about the Holocaust, then you can write a book about rape and murder, and it can be a comic. But what I didn't know was, am I the right person to do that? Do you understand? So it was, okay, am I just being very egotistical? Why should I be the person that might try to do this thing, you know? Well, there are many actually American comic artists who have talked about it, but not in the way that I wanted to talk about it, in a kind of worldly way, in a way that takes on not just the personal, but also the global and the shared experience. Rather than it being like a diary comic, I wanted it to be more like a kind of a social and political and cultural exploration of misogyny.
Você se lembra qual foi o primeiro quadrinho que você leu?
Yeah, I mean, in England we have really typical children's comics like the Beano and the Dandy and Wheeler and Chips. So yeah, I mean, but I suppose I gave up reading comics. Maybe, I don't know, as I grew up, but then I never really did superheroes, I have to say, but I am a big fan of science fiction in the other way. but not particularly of kind of Marvel and DC. It's more, I was always a big fan of Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. You could call me a Buffy nerd. I probably know quite a lot about Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, the TV series. I have read some of the comics as well. Things like Walking Dead and things like that I think are really good. And I really like really old-fashioned science fiction books like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley is one of my favourite books.
No seu quadrinho, né, Desconstruindo Una, você usa muitas técnicas diferentes. Então, você usa lápis, você usa um traço fino, você usa alguns tipos de textura. Como foi misturar todos esses elementos juntos?
Mostly because I was learning how to make a comic. It was the first time I've done it, so sometimes I drew with pencil, sometimes with ink, just to see what kind of images I could make, because I had never really worked like that before. I always did a lot of drawing, but I didn't try to draw narrative, so that was a new thing for me. So that's why the material changes through the book, but also because I do really think even now that I've drawn more books, that it's better for an artist to be always a little bit reaching a little bit further so that you don't get too comfortable with that. So I like to be experimental, I like to be always out of my comfort zone. But also I think that for that particular book, for Desconstruindo Una, it matches the themes of trauma, that it's a little bit broken into parts. And it's a little bit like being on a swing or something. Maybe you kind of go through the story like this a little bit, and sometimes it's sudden, there's a sudden change, or sometimes there's something surprising. And I think that that's a little bit like how it feels to be in a post-traumatic state as an individual, but also, you know, as a group of people, as a climate or a culture, a post-traumatic culture is difficult to understand and difficult, it doesn't stick together properly. And I think so for this particular book, I think it's a really good, for me, I think it's a really good way of doing it.
Ainda sobre o Desconstruindo Una, eu queria saber quais foram os seus maiores desafios na hora de roteirizar e desenhar, porque eu acho que não é só desenhar, a gente tem uma dificuldade com o conteúdo que está aqui.
Really, it should be challenging, I think, to make something. The biggest challenge really was the learning, because it was always tempting. I was learning all the time, and it was always tempting to write too much, to have too many words. It still has probably too many words for most comics artists, but what I didn't want to do was to describe in images in a spectacular way the violence. So sometimes I had to rely on words, and sometimes I had to rely on images, and I tried to choose carefully. So maybe that's the biggest challenge, and that was partly why it took so long, because there was a lot of revision. Sometimes people need someone to just come along and say, "What is that? What do you mean by this? What's happening here?" Because sometimes you can't see it, and also you need someone to say, "Oh, wow, that's so beautiful," because sometimes you can't see that it's beautiful either.
Como você sentiu que o quadrinho repercutiu?
It seems to have had a really big impact. That's quite strange to me as well, because I didn't know whether people would like it. I didn't know whether people might find it, I don't know really, maybe offensive is the wrong word, but maybe they would think that it was not a good way to write about the murder, especially the murder of other people, the 13 women that appear at the end of the book, for example. I get emails from people who have never experienced any violence, but they're just really glad to have been able to read in a very straightforward way something that helps them to understand what it is, what misogyny, what woman-hating is. Really good. I also get emails from men saying, "I've read your book, it's really made me think, because this is not something, I'm not an aggressive or violent person, but I'm looking at some of my friends very differently, and I'm wondering, what do I do? What should I say? And things like that." And then I get letters from women who tell me their whole story, and sometimes I'm the first person that they've told. That's really difficult because it's a massive responsibility, which I didn't really want, but now that I've got it, I've decided I have to take that responsibility seriously, so I always reply.
O seu nome não é Una, né? Você tem outro nome. Por que você escolheu Una?
For this, because I speak Spanish as well, so it made sense to me to use, because it's like a girl's name and it also means the number 1. Because I didn't want it to be about me. Obviously, it's my story, so it's about me in that sense, but I wanted Una to be like anyone, like she could be anyone. I suppose I feel really lucky and really privileged to be in a position to do this when I know that when I kind of had the realization that maybe what I should do was to try to write stories, really serious stories like these. I had spent a lot of time, I've got a lot of knowledge, I suppose, about the situation of women and girls, mostly in the UK, but also around the world. So I kind of know what it means to have a history like mine, and that for most women, the outcome is not that they have a doctorate like I've got. It's not that they, have a nice house in a nice area in a big city. It's not that they sit here like this being interviewed by people. That's not generally what happens. And I have had some really hard times. I didn't finish school, for example. I lost a lot because of the men that interrupted and abused me, and that didn't care about what would happen to me as a result of their actions. But I have regained some of it, and what's missing is still missing, but that's fine because I'm not missing, I'm still here and I'm doing very well, I'm very happy. But I understand that lots of other people are not. For example, so for my funding in the UK, I had applied for a 2-year project, and as part of the project I said I wanted to do an international trip. I'll go to a comics convention somewhere, and I thought, okay, I'll go to New York because I have got quite a lot of kind of contacts in New York, so I thought, okay, that seems like a good place to start with my international career. So I applied for enough money for flights to New York, okay? And then when the Brazil thing came up, when the Coletivo Rubra contacted me, I thought, actually, would that money be better spent on going to Brazil? So I phoned the Arts Council and I said, I asked for money for an international trip. Does it have to be to New York, or can it be a different place? And they said, yeah, it's fine, go to a different place, as long as you can justify and tell us what you've done. So that's what I'm doing here. And some people have said, oh, but this is Maui, is just a small town, and we are just kind of a little youth theatre group. But for me, that's the most important thing, that they are, because I'm not interested in people who... I'd really like to feel that me being here is helping them in some way. So I'm not interested in doing something more spectacular. I think this is spectacular enough.
O que você indicaria para quem está começando agora nos quadrinhos? E o que vem para frente? Quais são os seus próximos vídeos?
I would advise not to make comics unless you have got a lot of patience and unless you're prepared to give up a lot of time. And I think that if you want to be a really good writer as well, and I really want to be a really good writer as well as a really good artist, it just takes a really long time. You have to be quite dedicated. However, saying that, the best thing about comics to me is that anybody can do it and everybody can join in. Like, I really like the idea of zine making. I often do kind of workshops with people. I like the fact that you don't have to be able to draw. You can just kind of get a pen and go like that and put eyes and it seems like a person, and then you just make it speak. And so I would say, two completely contrary pieces of advice. Firstly, if you want to try making comics, just get a piece of paper and a pen and just make one. It's really easy. And then the other piece of advice is, don't even try to do it unless you want to be completely driven mad by the enormous work of it. So, I don't know. Not very good advice. Is it?
Oh, I think it's good.
There was a second part of the question. Oh, so what am I doing now? Well, I'm here. I finished the book, well, not quite finished, but nearly finished the book Eve, and that will be published in the UK in 2020, I think in August. And I'm hoping that this trip with Quality Rubra will turn into something, but I just don't know what.